So think back to a time maybe you were walking out of a movie theater, or you just closed a book at like 2 in the morning.
Right.
And you just sit there, you look around your room, you look at your life, and you feel this sudden, overwhelming sense of, I don't know, disgust or just complete realization.
Yeah, that post-story paralysis.
Exactly. And it's because an author basically figured out how to weaponize fiction, right? They completely rewired how you see the world. And the craziest part is you never even felt like you were sitting in a lecture.
It really is, it's basically a magic trick.
Yeah.
Because when you open a book, you think you're just, there for the entertainment. You're waiting to see if the detective solves the murder or if the protagonist escapes the burning building.
Right, you're tracking the plot.
Exactly. But underneath that surface layer, there is this incredibly sophisticated delivery system for, really complex philosophy. The plot is just a Trojan horse.
Well, Trojan horse, I love that.
And the ideas are the soldiers inside, just waiting to breach your intellectual defenses.
Well, welcome to this deep dive, because today our whole mission is to basically dismantle that Trojan horse piece by piece.
We're taking it apart.
We are. We're pulling all of this from a really fascinating video transcript by the YouTube channel BookFox. It's titled, "Most Novels Have Nothing to Say, Make Yours." And it explores 8 specific techniques that authors use to smuggle these massive, complex ideas into fiction without just boring you.
Which is, it's such a valuable framework for you, the listener, no matter what your angle is here.
Totally.
Like if you're an aspiring novelist trying to figure out how to weave themes into a messy draft without sounding preachy, this is your blueprint. Or if you're, prepping for a book club and want to elevate the conversation past just whether you like the main character.
Or even if you're just a curious person who consumes media and wants to understand the psychology behind it, this deep dive is going to give you a totally new lens.
You won't be able to unsee it. You'll start noticing these architectural tricks in every movie or show you watch.
Oh, for sure. But before we jump into the first tech, we do need to give a quick disclaimer on the content we're covering today.
Yes, very important.
Because to understand how authors build these engines, we have to look at stories that push the app. So we're going to be talking about heavily charged political and philosophical ideas.
We're talking like radical anti-consumerism, anarchism, dystopian gender politics, extreme stuff.
Right. And we want to make it explicitly clear right now that we are impartially analyzing.
Exactly.
We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any of the points. We're just popping the hood how the rhetorical, right?
Yeah, we are strictly looking at the mechanics of persuasion.
Yeah.
Entirely separate from the moral payload itself.
Okay, so let's start with probably the most visceral, aggressive delivery mechanism an author can possibly...
The heavy hitter.
Yeah. If some stories want to gently persuade you over a light cup of tea, this approach wants to physically drag you into an alley and punch you in the face. Literally. We're talking about the 1-2 punch of razor-sharp dialogue combined with extreme physical action.
It is definitely the least subtle tool in the shed. But man, when it's executed well, it leaves a crater in the culture. And the masterclass for this, the prime example from the BookFox analysis, is Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club.
Oh, yeah.
That novel carries this incredibly aggressive, uncompromising, anti-consumerist message. And Palahniuk doesn't just, gently suggest this idea. He uses this calculated combination of punchy dialogue and then escalating physical violence to just hammer it into your brain.
The dialogue in that book is just, it's infectious. It's engineered to be so sharp. You get these iconic mantras, right? Like, the things you own end up owning you.
It's savage.
It is. And the critique of the whole modern rat race, there's that bit where the narrator is flipping through an IKEA catalog, wondering what kind of dining set defines him as a person.
Right, buying things we don't need.
With money we don't have, to impress people we don't like. Or the big one, you are not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. It just systematically tears down the assumptions of material.
But here's the thing. The dialogue is only half the equation.
Right.
Because if the whole book was just 300 pages of a guy sitting in a coffee shop complaining about his IKEA furniture, it would be awful. It would be totally unreadable.
I'd put it down after chapter 1.
Exactly. The dialogue is just the setup. It verbally constructs the critique. But then the characters actually have to manifest those ideas in the real world. They have to act on them.
And action they take is so primal. I mean, they don't start a debate. They start an underground fight club in the damp basement of a dive bar.
Stripping away all the societal rankings.
Yes. When you step onto that concrete, there are no senior vice presidents, no baristas. You're just reduced to your biological essence.
Scrapping in the dark.
Right. And they escalate it. Right. It goes from personal violence to massive systemic destruction. The climax is them bombing the credit card buildings to erase all the wealth and debt records.
Literally blowing up the foundation of the society they were critiquing.
It really makes me think of, well, it's like a trial lawyer presenting a case to a jury.
That's a good analogy.
Like the dialogue, those savage one-liners, that's the opening statement. It sounds great. It gets the jury leaning forward. But an opening statement doesn't convict anyone.
Right, you need proof.
The action, the bombing of the towers, that is the hard evidence introduced in discovery. That proves the case. But I do have a question about this mechanically.
Sure.
If the one-liners are already so brilliant, like college kids are taping them to their dorm room walls, why is the action actually necessary? Why isn't a savage critique enough to just sustain the reader's?
Because the human brain instinctively rejects unearned wisdom.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, an idea without action is just a lecture. When you read fiction, your defense mechanisms against being manipulated are actually really high. You don't want an author in a character suit lecturing you.
Nobody wants to read a sermon.
Exactly. And that's actually the most common mistake novice writers make. They write pages of pure exposition, pausing the story so their protagonist can give this flawless soliloquy.
Right.
But brevity, delivering the critique in one sharp sentence, followed by the characters actually risking something physical, that creates the backbone of the belief.
So the physical risk is the key.
Yeah, because it transforms a philosophical abstract into a high-stakes reality. It's one thing to say, I hate the banking system over a beer. It's totally different to wire high explosives to a skyscraper and risk federal prison to prove it.
The blood is basically the currency that buys the reader's buy-in.
I love how you put that, yeah.
Okay, so if a story like Fight Club is about tearing a society down from the inside out to prove a point, what happens when we scale that up? Like, how do authors prove a point by building entirely new societies from scratch?
Oh, man, this is where we shift from the micro-rebellion to, like, macro creation.
Yeah.
The author becomes an architect of competing civilization.
Right.
And the absolute brilliant demonstration of this from the BookFox source is Ursula K. Le Guin's science fiction masterpiece, The Dispossessed.
An ambiguous utopia.
Yes, that subtitle is so important because to explore different political ideologies, Le Guin doesn't just have characters argue in a room. She builds distinct planetary societies that operate on completely different ideological systems.
The world building is staggering. I mean, you have the nation of Thu, which represents the strict top-down authoritarian system.
Right.
Then you have Ben Billy, which is unstable and sort of mirrors the third world. Then LO, which is this wealthy, highly stratified capitalist West.
And then the main focus.
Yeah, Munanaris, which is this harsh mining colony operating as a totally anarchist society. No government, no property, no laws. And she sets them all against each other to see who wins the ideological battle.
But think about the massive risk she's taking.
Well, that's exactly what I was back on. Isn't there a huge risk of writing like a cheesy rah-rah cheerleader?
100%.
Because if the author personally favored the natural trap to make the capitalist planet an evil cartoon and make the anarchist planet a flawless Garden of Eden, doesn't the deck feel inherently stacked, reader?
Yes, and that exact trap is what ruins like 90% of political fiction.
Totally.
But avoiding it is what makes Le Guin a master because she anticipates your suspicion. She knows the second she introduces an anarchist utopia, you're going to cross your arms and say, yeah, right, that would never work.
Right. Human nature would ruin it.
Exactly. So she pulls this genius structural maneuver. She spends a massive amount of time explicitly critiquing the very anarchist system her book seemingly promotes.
Wait, really? She attacks her own utopia?
Ruthlessly. She doesn't present Munanaris as a paradise. She shows the devastating social ostracization that happens when you don't have laws. She shows the stifling conformity of communal living. She highlights the bureaucratic hypocrisy, the grinding difficulty of surviving on purely voluntary cooperation. She basically steelmans the arguments against her own preferred system.
So, psychologically, what does that do to the... Why does acknowledging the faults in your own argument make it so much more effective?
It bypasses your natural defensive skepticism. Because think about real-world political rhetoric. If someone says, my system has zero flaws, your brain automatically goes on the offensive. You start hunting for the cracks.
Right, because you know they're lying or hiding something.
Exactly. But when an author voluntarily points out the glaring holes in their own system, it completely changes the dynamic. It makes the narrative feel intensely honest.
It disarms you.
It stops feeling like propaganda and starts feeling like a genuine thought experiment. She's essentially saying, look, I know this has massive issues, but let's weigh these specific miseries against the miseries of authoritarianism.
It invites you to be a collaborator instead of a target.
Perfectly said.
And what's great is you don't need to invent entire planet, right? Like the practical advice here for the listeners, you can scale this down to anything.
Oh, absolutely. Any setting.
You could do 3 households in a suburban cul-de-sac with different parenting styles.
Yeah.
Or like rivals team, or even different departments in a corporate office building.
Yeah, the accounting department versus the creative department.
Exactly. You just assign them different ideologies, apply pressure, and watch them collide.
Which is a perfect segue into a totally different strategy, because if Le Guin is about building a sprawling laboratory to test multiple systems, this next one is about isolating one single despised idea.
The cautionary, arguing by opposition.
Yes.
This one is so dark. The premise is basically the author picks an idea or a social trend and they follow it horrifying logic.
And the quintessential example here is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
Atwood looked at the culture and asked this terrifying hypothetical: what happens if the ideology that views women's bodies as property of the state or the church is taken to its literal legal extreme?
Where a woman's only value is as an incubation vessel.
Exact. She takes that deeply disliked premise and builds the Republic of Gilead around it, just to show the reader exactly how suffocating it would act.
And what's so brilliant about the execution is that she doesn't rely on massive macro level world building to argue point.
No, it's all in the details.
Right. Like in the source video, they bring up that specific detail of offered at dinner. She manages to save a tiny greasy pat of butter from her meal.
Oh, that seam.
She hides it, sneaks it to her room, and uses it as hand lotion because the government has banned all cosmetics to erase vanity.
So visceral.
It really is. And I was thinking about why that specific butter detail hits so hard. It's like trying to understand a massive macroeconomic problem, like a recession. If you look at GDP graphs and inflation charts, your eyes glaze over. It's too big. But if you zoom in on a single empty checking account of a mother trying to buy groceries suddenly, you feel the entire...
Because human empathy does not scale to statistics. We are biologically wired to connect with individual suffering.
So the story itself is communicating the argument.
Exact. Atwood doesn't need to write a 10-page essay debating the ethics of bodily autonomy. The butter does the heavy lifting. By denying a character the basic luxury of hand lotion and forcing them to smear animal fat on their skin just for a tiny bit of comfort.
It anchors this massive political theory in real, tangible human.
It bypasses the intellect and hits the emotional center of the brain. You feel the indignation, you feel the loss of agency. And once you deeply feel that deprivation, the author has won the argument against Gilead without ever explicitly
Man, that is powerful. Okay, so we've looked at worlds built around ideas. Now let's shrink the scale down even further to the flesh and blood pop.
Right, how characters themselves become the arguments.
This brings up two techniques that are kind of two sides of the same. Embodying ideas versus speaking ideas.
Let's unpack embodying ideas first. This is where the sheer existence and survival of a character serves as the proof of a concept. A great example of this is Kristen Hanna's historical fiction, like The Nightingale and the Women.
Right. So in The Nightingale, the argument is for the critical, often unrecognized heroism of women during World War II.
Yes.
But Hannah doesn't just tell us women were brave. She embodies it in Vianne, who is hiding Jewish children from the Nazis, and Isabel, who is physically guiding downed airmen across freezing mountains. Their literal survival is the argument.
But there's a crucial mechanical trick to making this work.
The opposition character.
Exactly. You cannot have these characters exist in a vacuum. You have to include a walking, talking straw man. In Hannah's book, there's a male character early on who explicitly claims that women are frail, emotional, and useless in war.
Right, which immediately offends.
Right. You read that and think, oh, I cannot wait to see this guy proven wrong.
It gives the protagonist something to prove wrong. If everyone in the village already agreed women were heroic, there would be no thematic friction.
Exactly. Friction is everything. Now, let's contrast that with the other side, people as mouthpieces.
Oh, this one sounds so dangerous to write.
It is. This is where characters don't just act out ideas. They actively, verbally advocate for them. They become literal megaphones.
And the example here is Michelle Houellebecq's The Elementary Particles.
Yes, the book focuses on two half-brothers who are basically extreme archetypes for the failures of modern.
Right, so you have Bruno, who is just unchecked hedon. He has this animalistic craving for pleasure, no moral purpose, just sex and consumption.
He's drowning in desire.
Yeah. And then his brother, Michel, is a molecular biologist who is the exact polar cold abstract logic, a complete absence of wanting or connecting.
And in the book, these two will literally sit in a room and monologue at each other for 2 or 3 pages at a time.
Which mechanically sounds like it should completely kill.
Oh, in the hands of an average writer, it would be insufferable.
Right. If I'm reading a novel and two guys are just lecturing each other for pages, why wouldn't I just put the book?
Because Houellebecq uses a brilliant structural secret weapon. Neither character is right.
So the author isn't picking a favorite.
Exactly. He's not using one brother as a puppet to win the debate. Both Bruno's hedonism and Michelle's sterile detachment are explicitly framed as profound, tragic mistakes.
They're both
spectacularly miserable. The tension isn't about waiting to see who wins the argument. The tension is watching this slow-motion philosophical train wreck. The book is searching for a third, better post-human option.
So because the author isn't picking a side, you don't feel cornered.
Right. When a character lectures for 3 pages, but their own life is a disaster, the lecture isn't a sermon, it's a symptom. The friction between Bruno's too much wanting and Michelle's absence of wanting keeps you hooked.
That makes so much sense. Okay, let's move to something totally different. The rug pull.
Oh, the inversion technique.
Yes. If the previous techniques rely on clear premises, this one is all about maliciously betraying the reader's trust regarding this.
It's arguably the most sophisticated trick you can pull.
Yeah.
You explicitly present a foundational rule at the beginning of the story, and then you spend the rest of the book systematically subverting it.
The classic example is Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the basis for Blade Runner.
Right.
The setup is stated plain. The dividing line between human and machine is empathy, and they have the Voight-Kampf test to measure it.
It establishes this comfortable binary. Humans are empathetic, androids are cold calculating.
But the subversion is a slow drip. As Deckard hunts them, you notice this unsettling contradiction. The human characters act incredibly unempathetic. They're cold, selfish bounty.
While the rogue androids actually start demonstrating deep sympathy and mourning for each other.
I was thinking about this, and it's basically like writing a character arc, but for an idea.
A character arc for an idea. That's a fantastic way to put it.
Because with a character, you figure out where they need to end up, and you start them at the exact opposite end so they have room to travel. Here, Dick figured out the destination of his theme, that the line between human and machine is blurry, and he intentionally started the book by loudly stating the opposite.
And psychologically, what that does to the reader is incredible. It leaves you feeling deeply off balance. You start thinking, wait, is empathy really the dividing line? Are the humans the actual monsters?
It turns you into an active detective.
Exactly. You're no longer a passive recipient of a moral lesson. You are actively solving a philosophical mystery alongside the plot mystery. You are wrestling with the author's idea on every single page.
Man, that is just brilliant storytelling. Okay, we're entering the final stretch, the high wire acts.
The 2 most difficult extremes.
Right. On one end, telling the reader exactly what the idea is in plain text, and on the other end, telling them absolutely nothing and letting the chaotic events speak for themselves.
Let's start with direct idea. This is the hardest technique, and it's the cliff most novice writers fall off of. It's when an omniscient narrator directly philosophizes to the reader.
The ultimate success story here is Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness.
The audacity of the opening of that book is wild.
It really is. It opens with these thick, dense paragraphs directly addressing Nietzsche's concept of eternal return. It talks about the metaphysical weight of decisions and the lightness of a life where choices only happen once. There are no characters in the first, just pure philosophical.
But there's a massive danger. In the source material, they warn about authors like Ayn Rand, how readers can see through the character dialogue and feel like the author's just lecturing them.
Right, it turns into a thinly veiled manifesto. So how does Kundera survive this? How does he open with Nietzsche without alienating the reader?
He survives because of his mastery of the transition. He states the grand philosophy, but then he immediately pivots and injects those abstract concepts into deeply flawed, messy human characters.
Tomas, Teresa, Sabina.
Exactly. He grounds the sterile philosophy into the chaotic reality of infidelity, political oppression, and jealousy. The characters physically embody lightness and weight. If you just stayed in the narrator's voice, the book would collapse under its own pretension.
It's the grounding in human frailty that saves it?
Precisely.
Okay, so on the absolute opposite extreme, we have our final strategy. Story as art. If Kundera opens with a mega, this author operates...
Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah. His stark masterpiece, No Country for Old Men. Here, the idea evolves purely through plots.
It's a stunning deconstruction of narrative argument. It unfolds in 3 stages. First, the premise. We meet Anton Chigurh, who views himself as an instrument of fate. He uses coin flips to decide if people live or die.
Right. He's telling the reader that human agency is an illusion. Fate decides everything.
Then stage 2, the challenge. He corners Carla Jean, the wife of his target. He offers her the coin toss, but she refuses to play. She looks at him and says, "The coin don't have no say, it's just you."
She forces the personal responsibility back onto him.
Exactly. And then stage 3, the conclusion. Chigurh is just driving away, following the rules of the road, and out of nowhere, he gets brutally T-boned by a speeding car.
Which brings me to my big question. If Kundera shouts his ideas, how does McCarthy's silent car crash pull off the exact opposite effect? How does a random traffic accident resolve a debate about fate?
Because of what McCarthy doesn't, there's no narrator explaining the irony. There's no character delivering a soliloquy to wrap up the theme. The mere event of the brutal crash is the final, irrefutable argument.
It proves Carla Jean was right.
Yes, the physical reality of the crash shatters Chigurh's philosophy. It proves he isn't some elevated demon of fate. He's just a fragile human, subject to the random, omnipresent violence of an indifferent world.
Which is a huge theme in all his...
Right, but he respects the reader too much to write an essay about it. He just runs a 2-ton vehicle through an intersection and shatters the illusion of control. The plot itself is the philosophy.
It is breathtaking.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath and quickly recap, because we have covered so much architectural ground today. We started with the explosive action of Fight Club, learning how action proves an idea. We zoomed out to the galactic political labs of Le Guin, seeing how critiquing your own utopia builds trust.
We felt the suffering in Atwood's dystopia, where a pat of butter argues against a totalitarian regime.
We looked at characters as arguments, either embodying heroism, like in Kristen Hanna's work, or being tragic mouthpieces in Hillebeck.
We saw the deceptive trickery of Philip K. Dick, subverting his own rules to make the reader an active detective.
And finally, we balanced between Kundera's direct philosophical addressing and McCarthy's silent, violent plots.
If there is one ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, it's that ideas in fiction cannot remain static. They have to evolve, face credible opposition, and be grounded in lived human.
The idea has to sweat.
The idea has to sweat, and it has to bleed. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We spent an hour talking about how brilliantly authors construct these blueprints to change our minds.
Right.
But think about your absolute favorite book or movie, the one that truly shifted your world. Do you think the creator actually knew the argument they were making from page one?
Oh, that's a great question.
Or is the ultimate trick of great fiction that the author is just as confused as we are, and they're simply using the story to argue with themselves? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Understanding these mechanisms makes every future story you encounter infinitely richer.